Last week, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints made available a document that they had long denied even existing. Without any announcement or fanfare, the LDS Church's history catalog started displaying a new entry. MS 34928 was the file number, and the title was John Taylor Revelation, 1886, September 27. This is a document that has long been at the center of speculation and historical debate and has been a core mythical document at the heart of the Mormon fundamentalist movement, even while it was denied by LDS authorities. So now that it's available for everyone to look at and affirm that it is indeed real, let's talk about the document, its origins, its significance, its suppression, and the questions that it still raises for the Mormon tradition today. To understand this document, we have to understand John Taylor. John Taylor was one of the earliest apostles of the Mormon tradition, and he became the LDS president in 1880. He was a dogged defender of what he believed were the pioneer principles, and above all else, polygamy, even as the federal government was doing all it can to stamp out the practice, including arresting, trying, and convicting polygamists through a series of federal legislation and legal revisions during that decade. Rather than giving in to those federal threats, John Taylor doubled down, saying that we're never going to give up polygamy, and spending most of his presidency in hiding as a fugitive from law. During this period, he was also known as John the Revelator because more than his immediate predecessor, Brigham Young, and much like the original prophet of the Mormon tradition, Joseph Smith, John Taylor dictated a series of revelations in the voice of God that allegedly pushed where he was going and what the faith should do, including a couple revelations that were canonized in European editions of the Doctrine and Covenants, revelations he received in 1882, 1883, that commanded that leaders of the church had to practice polygamy. Those revelations were eventually revoked after his death and never made it into the English editions of the Doctrine and Covenants, but they were always there. It was in the middle of this underground period, as scholars call it, where most of church leadership was in hiding from the law, that in September of 1886, John Taylor then wrote in his own hand a revelation directed to John, my son, that declared that the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, which I will discuss later, was explicitly referring to polygamy in this instance, could never be revoked and should never be done away with. Now, John Taylor died about a year later in 1887, and his immediate successor, Wilford Woodruff, who became the LDS prophet a couple years later, then famously issued the official manifesto, Official Declaration 1, that publicly proclaimed that polygamy would no longer be practiced. But as I've discussed in previous videos, that practice of polygamy did not go away easily. By the way, if you enjoy nerding out about Mormon history and learning about these fascinating episodes, and especially how they relate to the broader American culture, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I've done videos on the three manifestos ending polygamy. I've done videos on the origins of polygamy, and I've done topics on broader American topics. And also, please like this video and share it. Let's get back to the history. One of the things John Taylor did when he was the president of the church was ordain his own son, John W. Taylor, as an apostle, while John W. Taylor was still in his 20s. John W. Taylor was a dogged and devoted defender of what he believed the gospel of Mormonism to be, and especially the legacy of his father. And like many other LDS leaders, he continued taking plural wives even after the 1890 manifesto. That post-manifesto polygamy, as scholars often referred to it, included most LDS leaders as they believed that this was an eternal principle that could not change. And in those discussions, among the quorum of the 12 apostles, John W. Taylor would refer to a revelation in his father's own hand that we now know as the September 1886 revelation. And so as early as 1909, we have Joseph Fielding Smith, another apostle, another son of an LDS prophet, Joseph F. Smith, transcribing that revelation into the church's archives. So church leaders were aware of this. But this document became especially crucial at the excommunication trial of John W. Taylor, because due to renewed federal investigation and public agitation around the continued Mormon practice of polygamy in the first decade of the 1900s, LDS leaders and Joseph F. Smith, who was the president at the time, had to issue another declaration, the Second Manifesto in 1904, basically saying, okay, we're going to give up polygamy, and we really mean it this time. John W. Taylor refused to sustain that measure, and so he was removed from the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1905. But he didn't even stop there. For several more years, he continued solemnizing more plural marriages, claiming that he had the authority to do so, which led to an excommunication trial in 1911. And at that excommunication trial, he held up his father, John Taylor's handwritten revelation saying that this new and everlasting covenant of marriage, polygamy, as they all interpret it to mean, could never go away. And that's why he said, I can't be excommunicated. The defense didn't work. He was excommunicated. But what that did is that placed this revelation in the consciousness of those who wanted to maintain the practice of polygamy despite the church trying to stamp it out. So in the ensuing decades, there was a growing number of Mormon polygamists who believed that the church had made a mistake in forfeiting the practice. They congregated around a number of leaders like John Woolley and his son Loren Woolley, who started spreading stories and narratives that provide an origins of what comes to be known as the Fundamentalist movement. They claimed that in September of 1886, John Taylor had received this revelation saying polygamy could never be done away. And to act on that revelation, the Woolleys alleged that John Taylor also received divine visitations from Jesus Christ, Joseph Smith, and that in response to these actions, John Taylor then ordained a secretive priesthood council, including John and Loren Woolley, who would maintain the practice of polygamy should the LDS Church ever give it up. These groups, especially now that the Woolleys were publicizing what they claimed were John Taylor's revelations, including the September 1886 revelation, drew more converts, and the fundamentalists were seen as a direct threat to the LDS institution. Then in 1933, J. Reuben Clark, newly added to the First Presidency, worked with the other First Presidency and came up with a memo that comes to be known as the Third Manifesto, not just renewing their threat that those practicing and teaching polygamy would be excommunicated, but explicitly denying the existence of the John Taylor revelation. After that statement went out, one of John W. Taylor's plural wives, Nellie Taylor, recognized the falsity of that claim. And also remember, the church had a transcript of John Taylor's revelation already in their records, which shows that their statement that we don't have any evidence of it existing was not correct. But Nellie Taylor, who had sacrificed most of his life to the practice of polygamy during those 1880s underground days, she spent years in Juarez, Mexico, trying to avoid capture and trials and imprisonment. She contacted LDS authorities and told them, hey, this revelation you claim doesn't exist. Not only does it exist, but I know where you can get a copy. And so within just a few weeks, so the First Presidency statement was June 17th, 1933. By July 15th, 1933, the First Presidency had in its possession the John Taylor revelation in his own hand, saying polygamy would never be done away. But instead of correcting the record or stating it, they continued to deny its existence, and they sequestered the document for no one else to read. By the way, if you're interested in this fascinating moment of the origins of fundamentalism and the LDS Church, and especially J. Reuben Clark trying to stamp it out, I strongly recommend Christina Rossetti's article, Hysteria Excommunicatis, the title that fundamentalists gave to J. Reuben Clark because he suffered from a virus trying to stamp out the fundamentalists. Before Nellie Taylor handed over that revelation to the LDS Church, it appears that someone took a photograph of it, because photographs and typescripts of that revelation soon spread among the fundamentalist communities, and it achieved mythical status for those who claimed the LDS Church had lost its way, and that the fundamentalists, as they were now organized into a coherent movement because J. Reuben Clark was trying to cut them off, placed it at the center of their origins narrative. This was therefore seen as a threat to the LDS Church. So for nearly a century, fundamentalists claimed that this revelation existed, and this shows the necessity of continued polygamy, and the LDS Church not correcting the record at the very most, and also saying that that revelation does not exist. All the while, the document itself was held in the First Presidency possession. Now, flash forward all the way to last week of June 2025, when the LDS History Catalog, unannounced, had this revelation featured on the catalog. In this file that is digitized, you can see the entry here. This file holds several documents. Most importantly, it includes the document in John Taylor's own hand. The text is a bit faded, so it might be a bit hard to read. It includes several typescripts, including what appears to be the typescript that Joseph Fielding Smith made as early as 1909, as well as a memo signed by J. Reuben Clark explaining how they took possession of that document, the story that I mentioned earlier about Nellie Taylor. Now, the revelation in John Taylor's own hand is fascinating, of course, its own right. It starts with speaking to my son, John. It says that this new and everlasting covenant can never be revoked. It emphasizes that people need to fulfill their agency and act on their own accord, but that you could not enter into God's glory without entering into this law, that the law must be obeyed, that it can never be revoked, and that if it were revoked, it would not be an everlasting covenant. Therefore, because it's an everlasting covenant, it can never be done away with. That's the document itself. I strongly recommend going to the catalog and reading it yourself. You can try reading the faded text in John Taylor's hand, but you can also read the transcripts that make it a bit easier. And it appears now that we can compare to the original, that these transcripts that have been circulating around fundamentalist communities were correct. So now that you know a bit of the history of the document and the stories surrounding it, I'm going to try to answer some frequently asked questions as people have been discussing it since it was made available last weekend. First, is this a canonical revelation? No, there is a canonical process in the LDS Church where revelation is presented to the church leadership body and is then sustained by the church. This did not happen. Now, notably, this did happen for just a small number of documents after this time, whether it was Joseph F. Smith's Vision of the Dead that became D&C 138, or Official Declaration 2 that came in 1978, as well as Official Declaration 1, the Polygamy Declaration from Wilford Woodruff in 1890. However, I should also say that there were other revelations of John Taylor that were accepted by the church, including the two revelations I mentioned earlier that appeared in the Swiss edition of the Doctrine and Covenants in the 1880s, but were then removed later on. It also, by saying that it's not canonical, does not remove the significance of this revelation. This was a prophet speaking, and within a tradition in which it's claimed that when prophets speak in the voice of God, it is scripture, it raises important issues. Second question, what is significant about this revelation given all the other John Taylor revelations we have? I want to emphasize that all the elements found in this John Taylor revelation are found in other John Taylor documents from the 1880s. The revelations I mentioned earlier, several minutes from leadership training, where it is clear John Taylor was saying that polygamy could never be done away with, that it was necessary to enter the celestial kingdom, and that all leaders had to practice polygamy. We have all those things on record outside of this. So what makes this revelation so significant? Well, one, I think it's because it's in John Taylor's own hand, and that immediacy, that it was he himself that scrawled it, makes it a bit more intimate. Second, it's significant because it shows that while the LDS Church was denying its existence, they held it in their records, which shows how controversial and how much of a threat it was deemed. And third, it opens up questions of prophetic fallibility. What happens when a prophet is speaking in the voice of God, and that revelation ends up not being canonized or ends up being contradicted later on when Wilford Woodruff issues a declaration? Because if you are going to end polygamy, then that seems to, at least as practice, then that seems to counter this revelation saying that the saints must continue practicing polygamy. And I know you can qualify that by saying, well, polygamy is still practiced just in the eternities, it's not practiced in life, it's still a doctrine in effect. Those are theological issues that are left outside the realm of the historian. All right, another frequently asked question. This revelation only speaks of the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. It doesn't specifically say polygamy. Does that mean it's actually talking about polygamy? Yes, it is talking about polygamy. There are both textual and contextual clues that make this clear. Look at the textual clues. It is referring to a practice of the new and everlasting covenant that is under assault, and where the question of whether they are going to end it. What is being under assault, and what is that under question of being ended during the 1880s? It's polygamy. There's nothing else. It's not just monogamous sealings. It's not temple rituals. It is polygamy. And second, the contextual clues. John Taylor frequently uses new and everlasting covenant of marriage synonymously with polygamy. For instance, when he goes to trainings of bishops, he chastises bishops for not living what he calls the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. Those bishops were married monogamously. What were they missing? They were missing a polygamous wife. So it's clear from this and other actions, maybe I'll do a whole video on this some point, that yes, new and everlasting covenant of marriage can be a broad umbrella term at times. It can be used to just refer to anything sealed through temple rituals, through the proper authority. But in the 1880s in general, and in this September 1886 in particular, it is very clear that John Taylor meant polygamy. Now, if you're a Latter-day Saint and you want to try to find some faithful interpretation, maybe you can say that John Taylor was wrong in interpreting that way, and that way God was really meaning the marriage covenant. Again, that's theological questions outside the boundaries of a historical scholar. All right, another frequently asked question. Does this then vindicate fundamentalist claims? Yes and no. Yes, it vindicates fundamentalists who have long claimed this revelation exists. Despite being told that it's a pretended revelation from church authorities, this proves they were correct. However, this revelation does not confirm their claim that John Taylor was visited by Jesus Christ, that he was told to create a secret council, and that he ordained this secret council to perpetuate polygamy after his death. All of that is not mentioned in these documents, so that still can be part of the fundamentalist origin story, but this document does not reaffirm or counter that. All right, final question, maybe the one I've gotten most often. Why did the LDS Church make this document available now, after a century of silence and denial? Well, I'm afraid the answer is a bit more boring. I don't think it's a direct response to any specific thing going on now. I think it is part of the broader professionalization and access movement that has been taking place within the church history department for years. Think about over the last 15 years, the documents that had been held in First Presidency collection that were secretive, deemed too scandalous, being transferred over to the church history department, then being made available to everyone to research, whether that be the Council of 50 records, the Book of Commandments and Revelations, the William Clayton diaries that I'm going to do a video on soon because they're coming out probably next year, or the Spencer W. Kimball diaries. All of those were sources that were transferred from First Presidency possession to the LDS Church History Library, put on the catalog, and made available for research. I think this John Taylor revelation fits within that broader pattern. What is notable, of course, is that the church has remained silent on these sources, whereas all the other ones, they talked about them, they provided context, they published them. This one seems to show a bit more hesitancy, a bit more uneasiness, discomfort, and maybe that will change later on. But for now, it seems like they're just leaving it open for people to interpret, whether that's a good thing or not. So in conclusion, I promise I'm only scratching the surface of the significance, the lessons, the meaning, and the context for this fascinating document. This is one of the most important new developments in Mormon studies, especially relating to the end of polygamy and the origins of the fundamentalist movement in a long time. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video at some point. Please leave any questions if you think I can try to answer it. And maybe at some point in the future, I'll do a live Q&A if there's interest digging into the source. This history is fascinating, and history has never been more relevant than it is now. So if you like this video, please push that like button and share it, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet.